Welcome to DevReady Podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today we're joined by Surge Singh. He is the co-founder of Locumate. We met Surge in the pharmacy sector. Surge is looking to disrupt that sector in terms of how locums, which are effectively pharmacists that travel from one pharmacy to another, from a casual basis, or it can be in terms of a longer term, assisting in the pharmacy sector. So Surge is looking to disrupt that with an application that he's built, similar to Airtask, if you think about it from that perspective, where you can actually engage a locum to come to your pharmacy when in need. Surge, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys.
My pleasure.
And I hope I did the introduction justice, but as always, hand over to you. Love to learn about you, your background, and how you came about the idea of locum.
Maybe just explain to everyone what a locum is who doesn't know.
Yeah.
Fair point.
Yeah, so I was supposed to explain the term of a locum. I had to learn this through my wife, who's the co-founder, Kavita. And a locum is essentially a pharmacist who works in multiple stores to fill in, sick leave, annual leave cover, or when a pharmacy gets busy, you call in external pharmacists, which happens to be a locum, so almost like a contractor within the pharmacy space.
Like a substitute pharmacist.
Yeah, in a sense, yes, exactly. And comparisons have been made to education before. When we try to explain what a locum is, we'll say, oh, that sort of substitute is like in education. So yes, that's a good comparison to make, actually. And as a way of background, I suppose, my background has been in IT. Officially did a programming degree. Never coded a day in my life, though, I should say. And has...
It's okay, we won't hold it against you. Okay.
I can cut a mean SQL query if that makes a difference. But
it's not a bad place to start.
Exactly. So coming out of university, went into sort of sales/consulting roles, technical pre-sales, and have spent the last 4 and a bit years as an enterprise architect, working for an American software company. So learning the ins and outs of the larger application landscape within large enterprises. And I suppose my wife, who's the co-founder of Locumate, is a pharmacist, which is how the whole idea was born. Back in March 2020, she came home one night and I wasn't traveling as much because just travel restrictions and whatnot. And she was fuming with an invoice she had in her hand. And that sort of started the whole conversation around the frustration she was having in terms of the whole process and in regards to engaging agencies and locums and how that could be improved. And me being sort of out of the industry, I said, surely there must be a piece of software that can help with that process. And let me find something for you. And as I went through the process of trying to find a piece of software, look locally, globally, and turned out that actually one doesn't exist in terms of what you want to be able to do. And that's when sort of that light bulb moment goes off saying, hey, maybe we can build it. So we sort of sat down and said, hey, what does this end-to-end process look like? And, having that architecture background, process mapping, how information flows, where the users...
It helps. Yes, it does.
Exactly. So I entered my nerd zone with my wife sitting next to me, literally, doing all this process mapping. I said, oh, this could, actually work. And part of that journey has been, getting that idea from her head onto a process and then validating that with the users, right? Because at the end of the day, if you could process and define anything, but if it doesn't solve a problem for the end users, in this instance, we've got 2 sets, right? The pharmacy itself and the locums. And hence why, we say we connect pharmacies and locums through the platform.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. And there is obviously a clear advantage. Most of the people we're speaking to in this podcast are non-technical backgrounds. So to give context, they may be walking into a concept, or they may be in the position of your wife and be saying, I have a concept, an idea, now where do I go to? We find that a lot of people look to jump into projects and then get a little bit stuck as to where to start. I think one of the key things you mentioned there was process, understanding the process mapping, how things actually operate, and doing some background research of what exists in the marketplace, because that's always the first place you want to be going. Yes, we all may consider building a product, but sometimes people just build a product and later on find that there's 10, 20 other solutions that already exist. So to give people context, it's a really good background as to how you might think about starting a concept or looking at an idea.
You're in one of the ideal scenarios where there's a non-tech founder and a tech founder starting together. So you can protect yourself from being ripped off and swindled or whatever, getting confused even just by some of the people that are out there.
Well, I've got some stories about that process when we, went through the prototyping phase and got some quotes back on development. And, you get feedback about, this feature is actually so large and so complex to build. And being from a tech, there's an open source version of it. I know for a fact there is that you can use as a template, right? So it did help in that process. And one of the key balances for us is, if I get too technical, I've got the domain expertise to sort of, from my wife, to calm me down. Go, no, that's not going to translate in the business world. We need to do it another way to make it even more simpler. Because I think as sometimes technical people, we come up with a great technical solution and we think it's quite clever and quite simple, but it's not simple enough. And we've actually made it more complex by putting too much technology in sometimes.
Yeah, we can overcomplicate, and that's what tech teams can do sometimes. And it all gets back to the user, right? So when you're looking at that whole user experience piece, it is important to make it simple and the business process simple. So understanding all facets is a must. On the note of around quotes, there's a lot of things people jump into. They're looking to understand, all right, what it's going to cost to build, because clearly we need to know before we can invest into a product. Obviously that process can be a little bit daunting for the non-technical. How did you dig your way through that and maybe assess some of the teams that you're considering working with? Okay,
so I suppose probably the best thing we did in terms of the initial process was once we did the process of the user interaction, we created a prototype. So actual screens of what a user would go through click by click. So you're not building a system. You're essentially designing clickable walkthrough of what the app should look like. And this is much better than writing a 200-page requirements documentation, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And we found that made it a lot easier to translate when we showed development teams as we went through the quoting process. Now, to flip that, some development teams will look at that and go, oh, what you're asking for, we can do it in this many different ways, right? And some said, there's ways to do it because there's open source technology available. And some said, we're going to have to build everything from scratch. And that sort of goes back down to the type of team you're dealing with. And from our perspective, it was, we just need the minimum viable product to go to market. So we don't want to recreate the wheel in every single aspect of this software. It's to get it to a stage where people can actually touch it and feel it and go, you're on the right track or not. And I think that's vital, because you don't want to create the end product too early, because if you get it wrong, you've invested all this time, money, and effort into creating something that people can't use. So one of the biggest things for us was we got to that MVP stage quite early, validated the idea with end users. So we spoke to pharmacies, we spoke to locums. Like, that was key, and you have to do that. If you don't engage your actual users as you're building out the platform, even in the prototyping phase, you may miss something which is a big thing to fix later on.
Yeah, so being technical, it's important to understand that, as you architect something or design a mechanism, it could mean going back and spending 3 months fixing it, which may mean you run out of budget. So there's a lot to think about and a lot of risk when you go into this world, but high risk, high return type scenario when you're building product and business. It's just, I think building a business, 1 out of 10 succeed, and then building tech businesses, probably less than that, because you've got the whole business infrastructure to consider, plus you've got a product that's leading that. So there's 2 parts that can fail. So you've got to think about all aspects.
And that's a good point, Andrew, because one thing is getting the product right, and you're like, okay, how do you make this into a business? Yes. And there's a whole process that sits behind it, right? And we ended up hiring a team to help us with that, because we didn't have the expertise. Building a tech product is one thing. How do you turn it into a business? And how do you make sure both of those components move and progress together as you go to launch and as you go live? So if I could give one piece of feedback, is engage people that have potentially done it before. And we utilize a consultancy to be able to help us with that, because we thought it was key, because you could have a product, but if people don't know about it or you don't know how to make it into a business, then it doesn't last very long.
Yeah, there comes a lot of things in that. There's monetization strategy, what makes it viable, how do you keep your runway moving, how do you market it, sell it, how do you communicate it, because there's a lot to think about. And you're targeting a really niche market. How have you found targeting a niche market? Something I recommend to everybody that gets into this world, because the big platforms that serve everyone are generally owned by the big companies, the SAPs of the world, the ERPs of the world, that's just serving big organizations and companies. But when you're looking at niche, it's a massive advantage, because you can actually get in, understand and serve that market. How have you found dealing in a niche market?
Well, it obviously helps because we have the domain expertise through a co-founder. And you're right, because it allows you to solve some very unique problems or pains that the industry is actually feeling. So, we started having these conversations. One of the key things being in a niche market is, and being pharmacy and the way pharmacy operates, is building a trust in the brand. So, you couldn't just release an app. People had to know who was behind it. So one of the key things we did was we went to APP, which was the pharmacy conference in May earlier this year. And then from a niche perspective, you find you were solving one thing, but because you're niche to the market, you're finding other problems and solutions that you could solve by adding some additional features in, right? So just to give you an example, we said, okay, connect pharmacies and locums together. So it's a matching platform. You have a requirement, someone fills that requirement. And as we spoke, and because we're in the industry and we're not trying to be everything to everyone, when we have those conversations with the users, one of the things that we got back from the locums was, hey, I'm actually having issues with the invoicing. It takes too much time. Now, if you think about invoicing, it's an accounting thing rather than a matching thing. But we're like, actually, it's just a small extension and we can fix that problem. Now we've got an end-to-end solution that we're providing rather than focusing on one problem. Now we can do that because we're focused on the industry rather than trying to spread across the board too much.
It's that depth versus breadth. You can go deeper into the problems and understand everything better than just trying to be generic and fix some things for most people.
Exactly. And, there are groups and operations managers that we've been having a conversation with 12 months prior to launch, because they bought into the vision when we first built the prototype and said, this is what the industry needs. And we've gone back to them for feedback along the way as we've gone across the journey to today. And the insights that they provide about, actually, if you add another small step, you could solve this other big problem we're having. So all of a sudden, from day one, where it's just matching a locum to a shift, we're looking at other things that we can solve in the whole talent place for pharmacy.
Yeah, that's hugely viable. And I think people need to understand that if you engage your customers, they buy into the journey, like you just said, and they become long-term customers because they've helped you plan, build, design, architect, if you think about it, the solution and what it can mean for the industry for themselves. And it's easier to get buy-in, right? So at the time you pull the trigger and say, yes, we're operational, you have customers ready to go, not pull the trigger and then we have to market and find customers, and then find that our product is not really matching, because you can quite easily do that. If you think back to when you started, you had the concept, you were going to build that concept. How much have you moved from that initial concept in terms of what it will be delivered from an operation perspective?
Quite a bit. We're still, the foundation of the product is still there. The core product that we did is still there. It's just all of the additional things that have come along the way based on feedback, right? And I think you have to be very honest with your customers day one. So when we said we're building a platform to connect you with locums, well, until a database gets to a certain extent, we're not going to be able to fill a shift within 24 hours because it needs to be at a certain size. And I was honest about that and say, if you come on this journey with us, then we can do it. We can release features that can help fill a shift within 24 hours. However, if you don't get buy-in early on from potential customers and partners to come on that journey, then it's a difficult road. And because they're coming on that journey, you're hearing other stories, you're speaking to the stores, the pain points, and you're like, one small example is I spoke to a smaller group that said, we have trouble attracting students to our pharmacy group.
That's not a locum, it's different. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, well, it's a similar concept, but different audience, right? Yes. So how do we incorporate some of those challenges in? And it's not a big step. However, we can't do that today. So we're now working with them. So, okay, how do we take this next step with you and work together to not only address what our first problem, which was locums, but how do we work together to solve this other problem we have? And you're almost working in partnership with your customers to be able to do that.
So earlier, as you mentioned MVP, people can sort of get stuck with the word, what does MVP really mean? How have you framed that in the business to say, okay, what does it mean for you? What is it? Step one, we're commercial, we're viable, or is it we're able to test? What does an MVP really mean for you? Because everyone's got a different meaning.
For us, on our journey, it meant we were able to show the end-to-end process of the app working in real life. Because once again, in pharmacy, people said, we need to see it to believe it. So we took the MVP to the conference, APP, because that was us coming out as a brand, but also showing potential customers what the app could do. And and that was May. So if we fast forward 6 months, there's 1,000% difference in what the product's capabilities today. And that's just the nature of, the agile framework and how we do things. But when we showed, and one particular pharmacist owner came up and said, you make it sound easy, but I doubt it is, right?
Okay.
So I said, let me show you. And this is the whole thing about having a product that works, right? So this is what we've got today. I went in, clicked the dates, added the shift, and said, this now gets pushed out to all of the pharmacies. And I kid you not, like I've got a official quote at the conference with his photo. You'll see it on our LinkedIn page. His jaw dropped. And he said, it was easier than what you explained it to be. And I said, that's what we're trying to achieve, right? And I think the MVP's job is to bring some of those vision to life so people can actually touch it, feel it, and go, yep, that does what I need it to do, and it's going to solve that first problem. I'm now going to come on that journey with you to solve this problem holistically.
That's a fair point, just solving the first problem and showcasing that, because sometimes people can think about their product and just keep going and building and building and building, and the MVP is shifting and shifting and shifting because let's just add this, and this. How do you know where to stop and what's enough? Is it just the first problem? Let's show one process, happy flow, this is working, or what does it mean for you? Where do you stop?
Well, you're right. You could just keep going and going and going, right? For us, it was, do we have a product that can solve what we set out to do? Yes. Is it stable enough? As you know, with development, especially in the early phases, you're going through testing, but there's still bugs and so forth. Is it stable enough? Because yes, people, especially the early partners, understand that this is a new product. And in fact, the first group that we launched with, they said, oh, we expect bugs. We know there will be bugs, right? So let's just go and see. We'll test it and find bugs for you if that's the case. So that built a little bit of confidence in saying, okay, yep, we don't have to be perfect. And
that helps. It's a good customer.
Yes, exactly. And we shared our vision and said, this is where we want to be, but we're here. And they're like, yep, let's go. We're on that journey with you. So it sort of helped and made it easy. I don't know if you follow this guy on LinkedIn. Is it Andrew Gazdecki? The micro-acquire guy.
No, I don't. I don't follow it. No.
He runs micro-acquire. And one of his quotes was, the best time to go live is now. Because then you can start gathering feedback, right? Because you could always try to perfect the product. And before you know it, you miss the mark and someone else has come in and solved the problem where you should have. But for us, the MVP was, can it do the first bit? Yes. Did we have a partner, customer who can come on board and join us? Yes. And am I And this is the problem with being a techie. Is it stable enough for my liking?
Yeah. You're always looking for stability, aren't you? Yes.
Yeah.
It's a fine line between stability and then knowing there's bugs that you're happy to let out.
Yeah.
It's a known feature, right?
Yeah, it's a known feature. Yeah. Sometimes you got to let it off, because in the end, you're really looking for feedback. At that stage of that MVP, it's early trial. You want to know you're on the right path. Sometimes you can spend months perfecting, and those months are wasted because you were on the wrong path or tangent. So yeah, it's a tough balance, but making that decision. Yeah.
Exactly. Like this whole feature around the invoicing and payment, that was 12 months down the track for us. And we had all these other nice features that we wanted to build in before it.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it went live, and the feedback from everyone was like, we want that. So we brought it forward. Now, if we had waited 6 to 12 months, it would have been crazy, right? It wasn't, yes, we solved the problem, but it wasn't the biggest problem that the users felt that they had. So it gives you the flexibility to change your roadmap as well. And that was just that quick feedback from the users that are going to be using your system, rather than what you think or what your internal team thinks is important.
Yeah, I think it's when you're designing a roadmap, we have blinkers on, and we may make the wrong move, and that's very true. So the users should be driving your roadmap, not you or not a few people within a room, because as soon as you start thinking that way, you can go off the rails. You can be building something that isn't really needed, but what they need, like you said, is in 12 months time in your roadmap, so can derail it a little bit.
What you think they need and what they actually need are two very, very different things most times.
Exactly. And it's also the whole feedback loop, right? Like, you may have 100 users, and one user wants something very specific, but 99 of them want something else, right? You have to sort of, whilst being in a niche industry, you still have to be a bit more generic in your approach as well, and solve for the masses rather than the 5%. You could do that down the track. However, your focus needs to be delivering something that more people can use rather than restricting it.
In terms of that one there, how have you had those conversations? Because sometimes people can be a bit challenged in this space where they've got one customer screaming about X, but no one else needs that. How do you approach those conversations? What have you done in that area to actually appease them, but not put all your focus and attention on them as well, if that's not going to serve the broader community?
And I think this is where you can be honest and not overpromise and under-deliver, right? So we did have a conversation with a group where they wanted some very specific features in the app which suited their workflow. Understand it. Yes, it's a requirement, and we can understand certain groups will work that way. However, what we're building today, we probably won't get there to that level of flexibility for them to be able to change the workflow to suit their needs till down the track. And it's just an honest conversation saying, we're going to get there, but not today. It's going to be 6, 12, 18 months down the track. And I think that honest conversation, they know where we are, and we'll connect back at a later stage, rather than throwing everything out just to meet a very unique requirement and then forgetting about the rest of the users.
Yep. No, that's clear. No, it's good advice, because sometimes people are trying to please everybody, and it's just impossible. You can't please everybody in this journey. No,
you can't. And I think you need a clear vision of what you want the product to be able to do, and that is the guiding principle. So one of the best pieces of advice we got when we actually set up the company, someone actually said to us, set up your core values. And we're like, core values? Like, we'll worry about that later. Like, no, set up your core values. And when we did that, like, innovation was a key one for us, but simplicity was another one. So now when people ask us for things, we try to line them up with our core values. Even potential customers or potential partners, if they don't align with the core values, then it's not worth doing. Because that helps us stray true to what we want to do.
It keeps you on point. That's a fair point. If you're using it, I think a lot of people can put core values, and in the past we've been one of these. You put them on a wall, and you forget about them. But if you're using them in operation of the business, how you employ people, how you bring on customers, and even your product roadmap. That's the first time I've heard of that, actually. Using it against your product roadmap makes a lot of sense. That's an interesting take on that, actually.
Well, it was probably
a very good approach.
It was good advice that we received. And when we did try to enforce it, even with like we've been approached for potential partnerships and whatnot, and
Yep.
that is that is our book of reference.
Yes.
Like, actually, there's no alignment here.
Yeah.
They're not innovating. They're not making it simple. Like, that's going to make it complex, and no, that's not us.
Okay. No, that's very good because you use it in all facets of everything. I think that's a really sound strategy. It will keep you on point and it'll make sure the business at the end is simple, innovating, and whatever the other core values are because you're living by them.
Yeah.
Just putting them on a wall. Yeah, good point for everybody to think about when they're sort of starting because when we start, yes, we might have a vision for a product, but there's a business to think about too. Yeah.
They will go up on the wall one day.
Yeah. Oh, you need to do that, mate. Everyone's got to put them on a wall, but if you're living by them, everyone knows why they're there, and it makes a lot of sense. In terms of the vision for the business, talk a bit more about that. Where do you plan on taking this? Are you actually operational? Have some customers at the moment? What's the take and where it looks, and then what's the 2-year trajectory? Where do you think you might take this to?
Sure. So we did a soft launch 27th of September. We started getting pharmacies and locums on board. And so it was controlled, right? Invited set of locums, invited set of stores. And now we're getting stores that weren't part of the list signing up and locums that weren't part of the list signing up. And even though we haven't sort of expanded our outside of the Southeast yet, and the next phase is essentially to go all of Victoria. And that's going to happen as soon as the payment feature goes live, because we want to, expand with a solution already in hand, so that we're a few days away from that. And when that goes live, that will be the rest of Victoria, followed by the other states in late Jan, early Feb. And part of that is making sure we get the stores and the locums on board to make sure there's enough supply and demand. From a roadmap technology perspective, I've got my whole, future state where we want to be, and it's a case of what we're doing today with Locumate, and we're collecting some key pieces of data. So for us, we don't want to be just a transaction platform where you have a shift and that's all you do. We feel like we can provide a lot of great insights back to the industry. So one of those things is we built a feedback mechanism for every shift, and it's aligned to the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia's, how to become a better pharmacist vision on their white paper they built. So we looked at the white paper, categorized it, and included that as our feedback mechanism. Now, what does this mean? Is now we have the only platform in Australia that collects real-time data on every shift on how pharmacists are performing in the real environment, which then allows us to use that for, things such as, is there particular skill set or sets that are missing? Is there any particular areas of focus where we can utilize that? Because Kavi, being from the domain, pharmacist, owner, is to, at the end of the day, produce better pharmacists for the industry, because that provides better healthcare for the community.
You can imagine where that leads into upskilling, training in certain areas that are lacking from a pharmacist perspective, and areas of improvement, feedback from back to this pharmaceutical society. So there's a lot in that from a data perspective that could actually assist, and also you might find gaps that locums have that are consistent across the sector, and it might be 60% of them, and there's a clear indication of some sort of additional training or mechanism that's put into that area. So there's a lot of value in that data set.
Yeah, and unfortunately the way the industry is set up, and no one's ever addressed this, is locums essentially, they're self-employed individuals, so they don't belong to a company or an organization that invests back in their training.
Okay.
Because if you're full-time employed or part-time employed, you get your performance management, you get your, how you're going, tracking through the year, and then if there's training, then the company takes you through training. So unfortunately, there's no mechanism like that exists for locums today. And what we want to do to be able to better serve that community and make sure that they don't feel like a transaction, where they have essentially Locumate should be their community to be able to get access to those trainings and whatnot. So we're already speaking to partners who can provide additional free training to help upskill or certain areas of from a locum skill set perspective. So our vision is not just a transactional platform, but building a community.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a good context there.
Yeah. It'll definitely help the community, and then, like you said, the broader community in general, just getting that better service and improvement from the pharmacists across the board.
Exactly, and
yeah, one of the things is the locums also want to understand where there are areas of improvement, and also good feedback when there is good feedback, and reinforcement to what they're doing well, and I think that's a good thing. So they'll get that additional feedback, and then it'll be upon them to even invest in themselves and think about how they might better themselves in areas that they consistently see that they're lacking in. So it actually will make the industry stronger, as you said. If you obviously get mass adoption of a product like this, which is the end goal, it's mass adoption. It's being the number one leader in this space is what I would imagine you want to be, and then maybe taking it internationally at some point. But yeah, starting in Victoria makes a lot of sense. And even you said southeastern suburbs of Victoria, which is very niche. But yeah, I like how you've picked a little area, testing with some pharmacies and some locums, and then looking to broaden one step at a time. Because people can go too big too quickly. That can be another limitation, and then complete fail for delivery as well.
Exactly. And we didn't want to get stuck in a situation where we turn around and say, hey, we're national, but we don't have locums nationally on our database, right? So one of the key things that we did as part of onboarding, we did pre-registration as well to get users on the platform before the platform was live. And we had great uptake in terms of numbers. Going to the conference helped because people saw us, okay, yep, you exist, so I will now go and pre-register. So that's also helped us dictate where we roll out, right? So the reason why we chose Melbourne and Southeast, we had a lot of locums in the southeast of Melbourne register. So that dictated where we launched. And then if you look at numbers for other states, Queensland and New South Wales are actually quite even. So we could do both at the same time or potentially one after the other within a matter of weeks because the numbers are quite even. We didn't want to go, in the middle of a city where we had no locums register because once again, the data tells you where to go, right? Your data is key in every decision-making aspect.
Oh, brilliant. Surge, been a great conversation. One last question I like to always ask is, what gets you up in the morning? What inspires you to keep moving and target a big vision like this? Because it's not for everybody, but what gets you up in the morning and keep driving? And obviously there's times where it gets challenging. So what keeps you going every day?
I think it's the different conversations I have on a daily basis. You get the feedback about, oh, you guys are doing something great in the industry. Have you thought about this? People are reaching out saying, hey, you guys are doing great here. Can you do also this? So it's, how do I put it? It's this amazing networking opportunity that I've had as a result of this, where people are, crossing your paths every day, people doing something completely different in pharmacy saying, hey, we should connect because we could change the industry together in this component as well. So it's different to a 9 to 5 job. You sort of know what you're going to get out of every day. Yeah. Whereas here, one conversation in the morning changes my complete day. Like, for example, I woke up one morning with a severity 1. That was an interesting day, but you wouldn't change it for the world because I learned so much on that day that defined the processes I need in place to make sure that we handle it a bit better next time, right? So it's the different learnings every day.
Yeah, it's continuous learning. I think you flag that pretty well. It's that idea creation space that you're in. It's always continuous opportunity. And if you're solving a problem, opportunity comes to you. It's quite an interesting world that we live in. As soon as you start really adding value, you seem to find things pop up quite easily. So flow, it's that flow, state of flow that things start moving really well. Surge, really good. And go for it, mate.
Got one more question before we go.
Sure.
So, since you're in that unique spot as a non-tech co-founder and a tech co-founder, what sort of advice would you give to the listeners out there who don't have a Surge on their team and are just trying to do it on their own?
So if you're coming from the business world, right?
Yeah, so you're a non-tech founder trying to build your tech product.
Yeah. Find a great partner. And when I say a partner, it doesn't have to be a co-founder that you go and search out because that's a serious commitment, right? But find a tech partner that can help you build a product and fill the void of not having a technical co-founder, to be able to help you on that journey, someone you can build trust with to be able to bring to life from a technical perspective what you want to solve. I think that's key because if you can trust the company, the individual that you're working with to be able to bring that to life, that will that's a big part of the problem you don't have to worry about, right? So when Kavi goes and speaks about what she wants to achieve, she doesn't have to think about, how am I going to make this a reality, right? That's my problem. I think about it.
You need to have someone you can actually rely on and believe in and comes on that journey with you. Because either it's a co-founder, that is a big commitment. Even like you need to treat your technical people as technical partners in some capacity, because if they're not, they're just there for a transaction. I think that's where things can get a little bit stuck too. They have to believe in the vision. They have to be onboarded to that. That's something I've learned during this podcast is people that generally find good partners, they believe in the vision, they believe in the business and the direction it's going in, and they buy into that too. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed that makes a big difference.
Oh, it's so just on that, right? Like I've seen so many people that said, "Oh, so you're going to develop this and take this overseas, find the cheapest resource to build." I'm like, no, I need to make sure the people I'm working with understand what I'm trying to build, are coming on that journey and see the vision, right? So even though I'm a technical, I'm not coding it, right? So I'm shifting some of that responsibility to a team, and that team needs to share that vision. And that team needs to be able to think outside the box. So if I speak to someone who can't bring any ideas or innovation to the table, they're not the right partner, because what they're trying to do is build exactly what you're saying. But sometimes what you say can be done in a...
It can be, it's technology. There are 1,000 ways to do one thing, correct.
So comparing apples to oranges at that point.
Exactly. So just to give you that example, when we finished the prototype, had people interested from both parties. Like, okay, let's go build it. And when we went to find a development partner, I could quite easily tell they're just trying to make the most amount of money from this project, rather than someone saying, hey, actually, you can do this now. And then when you look 2 years down the track, you could do this because we built it to do that. And you're like, they share the vision. They can see where I'm trying to take this company, and that way you can rest a bit easy saying they're coming on the journey with me rather than a transaction, right? And I've reached out to people as I went through that process of trying to find a development partner, and I heard some horror stories. Like people take it, build it, give it back to you, and they gave you a really good build price, right? But then now you're like, oh, I'm going to try. That's like 10 times the price of the build because they know you're stuck. And you're real heavily reliant. And I'm like, that's not a partnership. That's a transaction, and they're taking advantage of that
it's a tough world, the tech space. Finding good partners can be challenging. We've had many stories on the podcast where people have gone down that exact sort of journey. We had one guy lost a house as a result of trying to build a product, and it's a little bit scary. That's why we started the podcast in the first place. We've had these people come to us and share their stories, and we thought, who's going to put their hand up and start sharing? And that's how we all started this conversation, because in effect we're just trying to share a conversation around how to think about building technology, especially the non-technical. We found them really get stuck and find that they might find themselves in a bit more of a hole than someone that's got a technical founder on the team. So really good insight in terms of how you approached it, because I think that's a good point around how they innovate, how they think, and how they bring ideas to the table. One of Anthony's articles you shared was never hire yes people and yes developers. And yes developers will just say, you'll tell them X, Y, Z, and they'll build X, Y, Z, and they won't do anything else. But how do you know as a non-technical founder that your X, Y, Z is correct, or the right way to do things, or even the right direction for the product? So 100% agree with that.
Yeah, and I've had stories where I envisioned the product to be built a certain way, and then when I get the result, I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even think of that, right? And developers are like, I just took the developers took the initiative, because they're like, it just makes sense from a user experience perspective to be able to do that. And the biggest piece of advice is get references, speak to their other clients. And see how they found the journey, right? Because if another client who's launched a business and speaking nice things about their partner, then you're in a good spot.
In terms of Surge, if anyone wants to find out about Locumate, how might they find out about you or get in contact?
Oh, look, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn, locumate.com.au, website as well. I'm always happy to connect and have a conversation, right? So if anyone wants to pick my brain about any part of the journey, I'm more than happy to have a chat. I think the more we can share, the more people learn, and the better experiences people get.
Thanks for sharing that, Serge. That's really good take. And anyone listening, yep, he's a great guy. Don't abuse that, but he's got a really good journey and taken a nice methodical approach to how you might build technology. Serge, thanks for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, guys.
We'll end that there.
Thanks.